But today I'm going to be talking about the spread of misinformation as it pertains to social media in particular. So, as Americans, we encounter anywhere from 4,000 to 10,000 media messages a day, and the average American checks their cell phone 150 times a day. We've never had more access to information, yet few of us can differentiate the news from all the noise, and there's a hell of a lot of noise. What was supposed to be the information age has instead become an age of misinformation. From welfare queens to WMDs, climate change to critical race theory, and the war on drugs to the war on Christmas. Much of what Americans believe is more mistruth than truth, and that's by design. So my book, How to Win the War on Truth, is an illustrated guide to debunking all the mistruths that cloud the media landscape. Excuse me. It exposes the secrets of media manipulators in the ongoing battle to get inside our brains and sway public opinion. In short, it's a crash course in media literacy to help us become more savvy media consumers. And that means learning to recognize propaganda. So propaganda is defined as any information that is biased or misleading. It's used to promote a particular point of view. In the simplest of terms, propaganda tries to sell us something, be it antacid or anti-Semitism. The word propaganda comes from the church. It literally means to spread the faith, not spreading the truth or spreading the facts, but spreading things that someone wants us to take on faith. Because at the time, the church was trying to fight the spread of something that threatened its power, Protestantism. So the principles of propaganda have their roots in the field of psychology, particularly in the mind of Sigmund Freud. So Freud, for those of you that don't know, was the father of psychoanalysis, and he devoted his life to studying human behavior and subconscious desire. Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays, used his uncle's insights to influence public opinion through the mass media. That is, TV, radio, print, or any other medium used to communicate to the masses. So in the process, Bernays gave birth to the modern propaganda industry. If we understand the mechanisms and motives of the group mind, Bernays wrote, is it not possible to control and regiment the masses according to our will without them knowing it? Consider, women didn't smoke cigarettes until Bernays branded them torches of freedom to capitalize off the suffrage movement. We didn't begin our day with bacon and eggs until Bernays gave us the idea. Nor did we consume paper cups until he scared us into thinking that drinking glasses could be unsanitary. In the 1920s, when women shortened their hair into bobs and stopped buying hairnets, Bernays convinced health officials to require food workers to wear hairnets in order to increase sales. It had absolutely nothing to do with hygiene. Bernays was so adept at propaganda that the United Fruit Company, later known as Chiquita Bananas, hired him to run a campaign that helped overthrow the democratically elected president of Guatemala. This is where the term Banana Republic comes from. As Bernays wrote in his 1928 book, Propaganda, those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government which is the true ruling power of our country. So Bernays' principles of propaganda were so successful, others across the globe soon realized their potential. To whom has propaganda to appeal? To the scientific intelligentsia or to the less educated masses? It has to appeal forever and only to the masses. Any guess who said that, audience? Anyone? No? Adolf Hitler. Now that guy could propagate some faith, as did his minister of propaganda, Joseph Goebbels. They both believed that if you repeat a lie often enough, it essentially becomes the truth. So, as scholar of German history, Benjamin Carter Hett has written, the key to understanding why so many Germans supported Hitler lies in the Nazis' rejection of a rational, factual world. Among the Weimar Republic's more fatal defects was that millions of its people deeply believed things that were verifiably untrue. Sound familiar? So Hitler and Goebbels' manipulation tactics were so successful, they gave propaganda a bad name. After the war, the name had to be changed. Does anyone know what the name was changed to?
Public relations.
Absolutely. That was it. Who said public relations? Oh, fellow Louisianian in the back. Public relations. So all modern forms of public relations are essentially propaganda. That includes marketing, advertising, publicity, branding, and political communication. So all propaganda has the intent to sell something, even if no money changes hands, whether it's a product, a policy, a politician, or simply a belief. Thus, someone always benefits from people buying into the propaganda. That's what separates it from mere information. So since the beginning of the American century, propaganda, or publicity, or public relations has been used by plutocrats and corporations not just to sell the public goods and services, but to thwart government oversight and regulation, to maintain monopoly power, to block progressive forces that were rising around the nation, to cover up misdeeds like the Holocaust or the murder of union organizers, and most importantly, to protect the wealth of oligarchs from the masses. So think the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. That marketing slogan is sold by the gun lobby and was developed by the NRA's ad agency, Ackerman McQueen, in order to defeat gun legislation that would cut into the bottom line of gun manufacturers. Think the Civil War was fought over states' rights and not slavery. That bit of PR was sold by the United Daughters of the Confederacy years after the Civil War to turn the South into a victim of federal overreach instead of the perpetrators of oppression. A misdeed indeed. Think tax cuts stimulate the economy. That's promoted by corporations trying to avoid paying taxes, protecting the wealth of oligarchs from the masses. Wealth that in other nations is used for universal health care and free college. So think voter fraud is rampant, that vaccines cause autism, or that a border wall would stop illegal immigration. All propaganda. But the more these ideas are repeated, the more we buy into them, just like our favorite brands of cola or cake mix. So when there was only traditional media, like radio, TV, newspapers, and magazines, it was somewhat easier to identify which messages sought to inform and which were trying to sell us something. When we turned on the evening news, we knew we were getting news. When we watched a primetime TV show, we knew that was entertainment. And when that show took a commercial break, we knew that was advertising. But today, those lines have never been more blurred because they all look the same in our social media feeds. Worse, media outlets that call themselves news are now some of the largest disseminators of propaganda. The main reason for this is deregulation, most notably the Reagan administration overturning the FCC's fairness doctrine. It had required that news broadcasters present controversial issues with equal airtime for both sides of an argument. Thus, partisan programming had previously been unlawful. But after the fairness doctrine was struck down in 1987, right-wing shock jocks flooded the radio almost overnight with one-sided political commentary, like Rush Limbaugh, who went into syndication within a matter of months. Before long, conservatives' voices on talk radio outnumbered liberal voices by a measure of 10 to 1. Sorry. Sorry, the slides are getting mixed up. Okay. But after the fairness doctrine, that's what I just said. All right, the slides are all jumping around. Apologies. Okay, so in 1996, to build on the fairness doctrine downfall, Australian media mogul Rupert Murdoch, who had been cozying up to the Reagan administration with fawning press coverage to grease the wheels of media ownership in the US, partnered with former Nixon political strategist Roger Ailes to bring this talk radio format to cable TV. So their brainchild was Fox News, a propaganda outlet disguised as a news network, which is why surveys consistently show that their viewers know less about current events than those who watch no news at all. So the conception of such a network originated in the Nixon administration in a document called A Plan for Putting the GOP on TV News, because Nixon thought the press treated him unfavorably by accurately reporting on all of his crimes, which he thought was just a PR problem. And the way to deal with a PR problem is to just produce your own PR and make viewers think it was news. So Roger Ailes' notes are all over that document in the Nixon library. Then along came the internet, which has democratized the sharing of information as well as the sharing of propaganda. The internet has become our primary source of news gathering, and now all that noise threatens to overwhelm actual news. Thanks to smartphones and social media, the problem is only exacerbated because all that noise can travel faster and further than ever before. In fact, fake news stories spread about 6 times faster than real news stories. So when it debuted, social media was heralded as a democratic tool that helped launch the Arab Spring. However, since 2010, democracies around the globe have been backsliding, even in countries that participated in the Arab Spring uprisings. So the internet, with the help of social media, has created an information environment that's devoid of gatekeepers and full of self-reinforcing echo chambers, easily exploited by bad actors, as anyone with a Wi-Fi password and a grudge can generate propaganda. So, as political scientist Barbara F. Walter has written, as social media penetrated countries and gained a larger share of people's attention, a clear pattern emerged. Ethnic factions grew, social divisions widened, resentment at immigrants increased, bullying populists got elected, and violence began to increase too. So why did this pattern emerge when it did? Does anybody know? What changed with social media around then? In 2009, Twitter introduced the retweet button, and Facebook introduced the like button, allowing them to track the types of posts that were most popular with users. Then Facebook, Google, and YouTube began using a new algorithm based on those likes. So this new algorithm didn't show viewers the latest posts from their family and friends, but they showed them content that was most likely to hook them based on stuff they previously liked in the hope of increasing user engagement. Because the more users engage with online content, the longer they stay on those platforms, which means the more advertising dollars those social media companies can collect, gathering more and more behavioral data about those users and their interests. So what type of content do users most engage with? To quote Barbara F. Walter again, it turns out that what people like the most is fear over calm, falsehood over truth, and outrage over empathy. People are far more likely to like posts that are incendiary than those that are not, creating an incentive for people to post provocative material in the hopes that it will go viral. So with the introduction of the like button, individual Facebook users were suddenly being rewarded for posting outrageous and angry content, regardless of whether it was true or not. Therefore, the most engaging content were posts that activated negative emotions like anger, hate, and resentment. The greater the arousal, the more likely users were to share those incendiary posts. That's because negative emotions are significantly more powerful than positive emotions, what cognitive scientists call our negativity bias. It's our tendency to react more strongly to negative stimuli than to positive stimuli, because negative emotions activate our fight or flight response, which is part of our evolutionary hardwiring that makes us keenly responsive to danger. It's a shortcut in the brain that essentially overrides critical thinking, because when threatened by danger, our ancestors had to decide immediately whether to fight or flee. Thus, fear was very beneficial to their survival, or we would not be here today. So our brains still operate this way. So when our fight or flight response is activated, we fail to think or reason, only to feel, which leads us to type an angry comment or share an indignant post without bothering to question the information. So those algorithms never show us less emotionally engaging content. In order to keep us online, they are programmed to show us content that is more and more emotionally heightened. So this means that if you are a mother worried that vaccinations may harm your child, consider what's going to keep you online longer. An article by the CDC that says vaccines are safe and effective, or an anti-vax site spreading fears that vaccines cause autism and that there's a global conspiracy trying to keep this information from the public. So you should coordinate online with other concerned parents. As one sociologist discovered, when she researched footage of Trump rallies on YouTube, the algorithm would start auto-playing white nationalist videos that grew more and more racist and violent with each video. The more videos she watched, the more violent and extreme the videos became. So this is how right-wing provocateurs like Alex Jones get so much traction online. The more emotional the content, the further it travels. And it doesn't matter whether the content is true or harmful. because as part of the Communications Decency Act of 1996, Congress included a section that absolved tech companies of liability from anything posted on their platforms. So this means that they are not held accountable for distributing lies, propaganda, or even hate speech that bullies teens to commit suicide. So don't be fooled by the theatrics of senators chewing out Mark Zuckerberg and other tech bros in the halls of Congress, accusing them of not doing anything about this problem. These tech companies are, after all, following the law. And if Congress wanted to stop this abuse, they could simply repeal Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act and hold service providers to the same standard as print media. But much like with the absence of the fairness doctrine, those same politicians benefit from the lies being spread. Enter Steve Bannon. So Bannon took over the right-wing website Breitbart.com when its founder, Andrew Breitbart, died in 2012. So Breitbart and Bannon both believe that if you want to change politics, you first have to change culture. So Bannon set about turning Breitbart into a platform to cultivate a new alt-right that would be defined by white nationalism and reject progressive values in American culture. So this coincided with Gamergate in 2014. Does anybody remember Gamergate? Do you know what I'm talking about? Excuse me. So for those who don't remember, Gamergate started after a female game developer released a video game about fighting her depression. Her disgruntled ex-boyfriend started harassing her online in order to drive her out of the gaming industry with rape and death threats. So as other female gamers tried to expose the misogyny of the gaming industry with their own stories and fight for greater diversity in the gaming field, male gamers launched a coordinated campaign of bullying against the so-called feminist ideology to preserve their male-dominated gaming turf. So Bannon saw the outrage manufactured by these involuntary male celibates, or incels, and thought he could harness their hostility for his alt-right culture war. So Gamergate gave him a blueprint. So Bannon was joined by the right-wing billionaire Mercer family, who owned Breitbart, and in 2014 funded a data analytics firm called Cambridge Analytica, which illicitly harvested our Facebook data that had been collected through those algorithms. So their goal with all this data mining was to find individuals who exhibited the dark triad of personality disorders, which includes narcissism, sociopathy, and Machiavellianism, or manipulativeness. These were the people who were likely to be authoritarian personalities and most likely to engage in antisocial behavior, like, say, hate crimes, harassment, and bullying, or breaking the law to get what they want. So Steve Bannon was now Cambridge Analytica's VP, and he knew that people who feel disconnected from society, like those disgruntled gamers, are highly susceptible to propaganda and conspiratorial thinking. So they would make the perfect target audience for his needs. And since the widespread use of smartphones, young males in particular have withdrawn socially, living more of their life online, which has led to less socialization and sense of community in the real world, thus making adolescents more vulnerable to online recruitment into radical political movements that offer moral clarity and a moral community, thereby pulling them further and further away from their in-person communities. So, Bannon and crew helped authoritarian politicians like Donald Trump in the US and the Leave EU Brexit campaign in the UK target these voters most vulnerable to fascist propaganda by tailoring their messages to the biases that were revealed by all that Facebook data. So these media messages stoked fear and hate against minority groups, not just women, but immigrants, LGBTQ, Jews, Muslims, basically anyone perceived as different by the dispossessed white male. So Cambridge Analytica even hired the very people they sought to oppress, namely Black people, gays and lesbians, immigrants, and other people of color, so that they could weaponize their insights and experiences against them. They targeted those people with ads, luring them to Facebook pages that the firm had set up to test out which messages worked better. They market tested slogans like "Drain the Swamp" and "Make America Great Again" before they were household words to see which would resonate most. Then they experimented with ways to provoke people's racism or sexism, and they encouraged them to organize around the grievances, as we saw with the white nationalist marches in Charlottesville and elsewhere. They also targeted African Americans with anti-Hillary Clinton propaganda to discourage their voter turnout in the 2016 election and to push them to vote for a third-party candidate like Jill Stein. So these were so-called dark posts, non-public posts that only they would see. They were invisible to researchers or anyone else looking at their feeds. So according to Facebook whistleblower Sarah Wynne Williams, Facebook even embedded staff in Trump's campaign team in San Antonio for months, alongside Trump campaign programmers, copywriters, media buyers, network engineers, and data scientists, basically inventing a new way for a political campaign to shitpost its way to the White House, targeting voters with misinformation, inflammatory posts, fundraising messages, and voter suppression campaigns. So these decisive messages were then amplified by the Internet Research Agency, a Russian troll farm set up by the Kremlin in 2013, whose mission was to use social media to influence public debate in foreign countries by stoking existing tensions to sow discord and weaken democratic institutions. During the 2016 election, Russia's own disinformation spread to at least 126 million people on Facebook, with over 76 million likes and comments, and at least 20 million people on Instagram, with over 187 million likes and comments. And Russia sent at least 10 million tweets on Twitter. So Russian operatives targeted conservatives with posts on immigration, race, and gun rights, and they sought to undermine participation by Black voters by extensively spreading misinformation about the electoral process in media sites that were especially used by African Americans. So fake Russian accounts targeted everyone from NRA members to the LGBTQ community, from Black Lives Matter protesters to Texas secessionists. Russian accounts even organized a series of Trump rallies that supporters attended, and one of Trump's sons even retweeted a post from a Kremlin account on Election Day. So these bad actors, from Bannon to Russia, succeeded in radicalizing isolated young men with more extremist beliefs, just like Fox News has been doing to America's aging white population for the last 30 years. So Fox has long employed several of Adolf Hitler's key propaganda directives, particularly 1, appealing to negative emotions, 2, repeating falsehoods, and 3, directing anger at an adversary, the same tactics that Bannon used through Cambridge Analytica. So when the world shut down during the COVID-19 pandemic, we became more isolated, spending more time online, which only worsened the problem. And it gave people a lot more stuff to be angry about, especially since cable news and social media drummed up outrage over COVID protocols. Once an online information silo is established, whether it's scrolling through Fox News posts on Facebook or watching Chris Rufo videos on YouTube, it's reinforced by the algorithm. And that algorithm is going to keep showing us stuff based on what we have already seen and agree with, not stuff that challenges our viewpoints. So this even holds true when it comes to, quote, doing your own research, because our belief systems shape the algorithm, which shapes our search query results, which in turn reinforce our beliefs. Which is why if I search on Google for, say, critical race theory, I'll probably get an academic article from a law school where it's taught, because I'm always researching scholarly articles. But someone who follows Chris Rufo or Fox News will more than likely be led to a page by the Heritage Foundation, full of racially coded fear-mongering. Or if I Google information on, say, vaccines and autism, I'll likely get an expose debunking the myth. But a conspiracy theorist will be led to a site that reinforces their conspiratorial beliefs. So these self-reinforcing algorithms are why right-wing figures have been encouraging their audience to do their own research, because they know that if they're already watching or listening to them, their searches and their algorithms are just going to reinforce the misinformation. And their listeners will be none the wiser, feeling vindicated in their false beliefs. So right-wing media is full of conspiracy theories and propaganda. In fact, it is its defining feature. research shows that most mainstream media outlets share an interconnected web of content that is consistently faithful to the objective standards of journalism, but that right-leaning outlets create a media ecosystem that's fueled not by journalists, but by shock jocks and conspiracy theorists who traffic in rumor, innuendo, and outright propaganda to reinforce their ideological brand narrative. Now, that's not to say that traditional media has not failed us miserably in the age of Trump, because they most certainly have. But often it's because they've platformed those partisan propagandists and amplified their lies instead of puncturing them in the name of so-called balance, or because they've routinely failed to platform nonpartisan experts to cut through the noise and properly contextualize what's happening, or because they've failed repeatedly to hold the powerful accountable. I could go on, but that's an entire different discussion. The point of all this divisive propaganda is that wannabe authoritarians and their enablers are using social media and other information systems to divide the electorate for political gain by appealing to ethnic, racial, or religious differences, pitting men against women, straight against gay, natural-born citizens against immigrants, or Christians against Jews or Muslims. So dividing the population into an us and a them is a defining feature of fascism. We are the real Americans, white, Christian, hardworking taxpayers. They are illegal immigrants, refugees, welfare recipients, drag queens, Muslims, Antifa, or any other powerless scapegoat that is turned into a dangerous enemy. Because by dividing people into tribes of us versus them, and then dehumanizing them, we don't have to feel bad about how we treat them. Which brings us to another defining feature of fascism: political violence. Because all that anger stirred up online does not stay online. It leads to violence in real life, just like it did in the 1990s when talk radio's hate-fueled anti-government commentary helped provoke a white power militia movement of violent extremists like Timothy McVeigh. So today, the radicalization happens on the internet. One study found that towns with higher than average Facebook use reliably experienced more attacks on refugees. This held true in virtually any sort of community, big or small, affluent or struggling, liberal or conservative. Wherever per person Facebook use rose by one standard deviation above the national average, attacks on refugees increased by about 35%. And whenever internet access went down in an area with high Facebook use, attacks on refugees dropped by the same amount. Most distressing, according to another Facebook whistleblower, Frances Haugen, who disclosed tens of thousands of internal documents and testified before the British Parliament and the US Senate in 2021, Facebook was well aware that their algorithms were amplifying hate speech and propaganda and radicalizing impressionable minds worldwide. Their own internal research showed as much, and they knew that bad actors were abusing the platform to undermine democratic norms, even leading to a round of suicide bombings and executions in India, which then spilled over into a genocide in Myanmar, all prompted by a fabricated Facebook post about a Muslim man raping a Buddhist woman, which Facebook refused to take down. And when they finally did take action, they ended up removing more posts by civil society groups and peace activists than government and anti-Muslim accounts. So in the Philippines, authoritarian President Rodrigo Duterte weaponized Facebook's algorithm to propel himself to power by spreading political propaganda disguised as news sources, which sowed fear and doubt in the electorate and which was amplified by bots, fake accounts, and his campaign volunteers. Filipina journalist Maria Reza alerted Facebook, but once again, they chose to do nothing. Because, according to Haugen, Facebook has realized that if they change the algorithm to be safer, people will spend less time on the site. They'll click on less ads and they'll make less money. In fact, in 2018, Facebook noticed that user engagement was declining. So to reverse this trend, meaning to enhance users sharing posts, comments, reposts, and other activity, Facebook changed its algorithm to lower rank posts reshared with a thumbs up like button and higher rank reshares with an angry button, as well as posts that contained the most arguing and fighting in the comments. So as a result, news and political organizations around the world started complaining, but then shifted their Facebook strategies to more grievance-based content to get their messages heard. So meanwhile, researchers have found that Twitter X is among the top choices for recruitment and radicalization by revenge terror groups, including Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, ISIS, and neo-Nazi militia, Neo-Confederate, the KKK, QAnon, and other far-right organizations. And it's only gotten worse since Musk took over. As a result of all this online hate, since 2016, threats against members of Congress have increased tenfold. And white nationalists have attacked Jewish synagogues, burned mosques, engaged in mass shootings of immigrants and African Americans, drove vehicles into peaceful protesters, plotted to kill FBI agents, shot up Planned Parenthood, tried to kill the Speaker of the House's husband, plotted to kidnap a governor, mailed pipe bombs to Democratic Party leadership, and launched an insurrection on the US Capitol. And counties where Trump held rallies often saw a 226% increase in hate crimes. So the number of FBI investigations into white supremacists and anti-government terrorism tripled during Trump's first term to become the #1 terrorist threat in the US, dwarfing the number of ISIS cases. So social media and misinformation have been weaponized to appeal to our biases, divide us for political gain, incite violence, and manipulate us into supporting people and policies that work against our best interest. And that is why propaganda exists in the first place, to sell us beliefs that benefit someone else. As Steve Bannon once said, the way to deal with the media is to flood the zone with shit. And as we've seen, shit makes great fertilizer. So in my book, I go into detail about the 5 main characteristics of propaganda, like how it ignores the full picture in favor of simple black and white narratives that appeal to our unconscious cognitive biases, to evoke negative emotions like fear and outrage, that divide us into market segments of in-groups and out-groups, or us and them, for the economic benefit of the ruling class. But since we don't have time to go into all of these in greater detail, I will leave you with 3 things to look for when encountering dubious media messages. Number 1, propaganda nearly always appeals to negative emotions. By triggering a negative emotional reaction, media manipulators override our critical thinking. And no emotion overrides critical thinking more than fear. Like fear that drinking glasses could be unsanitary, fear of a home invasion that prompts us to purchase a handgun, fear that vaccines could cause autism, or fear of immigrants bringing drugs or crime. By riling up negative emotions like fear, propaganda ensures that people fail to think, only feel. So fear, like anger or hate, translates emotion into motion, moving people to act on that fear, like buying a handgun to feel safe, even though it makes us 3 times more likely to die from a gunshot wound, or voting for politicians who want to limit immigration, even though immigrants are far less likely to commit crime than native-born citizens. So if it's scary, be wary, because a raw appeal to fear is usually used to cover a lack of evidence that a real threat exists, from making people think Haitian immigrants are eating our cats and dogs, to making people think that drag queens are grooming our children. Because if you don't have facts on your side, you cannot rely on logic or reason, so you must appeal to emotion. That's how politicians get people to reject policies that would otherwise benefit them. And that's why emotional appeals are a hallmark of partisan media. So traditional newscasters did not used to show emotion when delivering the news. They were once trained to be objective and detached from their subject matter. Think of Dan Rather, Walter Cronkite, or Edward R. Murrow. Or even cartoon journalists like The Simpsons' Kent Brockman, who's monotone and stoic, just like professional journalists were once trained to be. In 2018, Oprah Winfrey left 60 Minutes because she showed too much emotion in saying her own name and was repeatedly told to flatten her delivery. But on Fox, the anchors convey emotion with each segment. So their emotion is always negative and always related to outrage, which is the Fox News brand and business model. So you can watch any given program on the network, past or present, and you could usually identify the negative emotions underpinning their delivery of what they call news. As Adolf Hitler famously said, "I use emotion for the many and reserve reason for the few." So emotional awareness is key to recognizing propaganda, especially when it is of a political nature. So notice if someone is trying to stir up negative emotions by demonizing their opponent or trying to elicit anger over some sort of situation, like, say, inflation or immigration. Are politicians running on solutions to those problems, or are they just exploiting the problem for political power? For instance, are they running on concrete policies for immigration reform, or are they just riling up fears about illegal immigration or a border crisis? Are they fear-mongering about rising crime rates, or are they trying to eliminate the conditions that lead to crime, primarily poverty? Are they complaining about how their opponent has done nothing to solve homelessness, or are they presenting proposals to actually house the homeless? So people running on solutions usually inspire us to act based on positive emotional values that appeal to our core values. So consider for a moment, what positive emotional value drives people to support a strong social safety net, student loan forgiveness, universal child care, or health care for all? I'm asking you. What are some of the emotional values behind those positions? Empathy is one. What else? Cooperation, sure. What about charity? Selflessness, altruism, right? All positive values. So consider what values drive people to support regulations for clean water, environmental pollution, and curbing climate change. What would you say? What values are behind those positions? Responsibility, absolutely. Great. Responsibility, justice, hope, and a better future, all positive values. So consider what values drive people to support legal protections for marginalized groups like women or LGBTQ, or equal pay for equal work, or protecting voting rights. What did I hear? Fairness, equality, justice, right? Again, all positive values. But when people in power exploit our anger, hate, or fear, it should be a red flag they're trying to manipulate us, just like Hitler or other demagogues have done for centuries. In the words of Steve Bannon again, anger and fear is what get people to the polls, which is why they make us hate fictional welfare queens who are supposedly mooching off the system, or make us angry that today's students shouldn't get their debt forgiven when we had to pay our own debt even though college was a fraction of the cost, and why they make us fear that universal child care and health care are socialist in order to protect the profits of big pharma and health insurance. And it's why they make people fear that climate regulation and pollution standards will lead to job loss and plant closures and spread doubt in the science in order to protect the profits of big oil. And it's why they make us angry about affirmative action and DEI by mischaracterizing a leg up to level the playing field as an unfair advantage. And it's why they spread fears of voter fraud in order to chip away at the voting rights of minorities. Which brings us to number 2. Notice when those negative emotions are used to divide us into in-groups and out-groups, creating an us versus them dynamic. So this is what demagogues and fascists do to amass power. Directing people's anger onto a helpless scapegoat is another tactic from Hitler's playbook. Nothing is easier than getting people to hate someone who's different. So beware anytime someone in power tries to pit the populace against each other, especially if they are punching down, such as the poor for abusing the welfare system, but not corporations abusing corporate welfare, or at illegal immigrants committing crime, but not the crimes of the rich and powerful. There's a reason we see a headline proclaiming that immigrants are taking our jobs, but we never see a headline about how American companies hire immigrant workers under the table because they can pay them a sub-minimum wage. So always beware of any media message that directs our economic frustrations onto the poor or some other powerless scapegoat, as they are often used to distract the working class from challenging the ruling class. Which brings us to number 3. For any given media message, simply ask, who benefits by me believing this? Learn to question what the message is selling and who benefits by it. Who benefits from the belief that global warming is a hoax? The fossil fuel industry, right? Big oil. Who benefits from the belief that universal health care is socialist? Pharma, health insurance, private health insurance companies. Who benefits from the belief that there's widespread voter fraud? Specifically, politicians who can't get elected without restricting the votes of minorities. And who benefits from the belief that tax cuts for the wealthy stimulate the economy, but tax money spent on social services for the poor will somehow cause them to become lazy dependents? Right? The wealthy. The same who benefits by the belief that inflation was fueled by our meager stimulus checks and not the record profits of corporations, which hit a 70-year high. Who benefits by a meme that assures us what goes around comes around after we've witnessed a grave injustice or an abuse of power? Maybe it's just the people abusing the power, because the meme suggests that we don't have to do the hard work of holding the powerful accountable. Just let the universe sort that out. So the more you start questioning who benefits by the messages we consume, whether it's an ad for a soft drink or an old adage you've heard a million times, the more you find that most tend to work in favor of the rich and powerful. Because that's where propaganda comes from. Those whose money, power, and privilege are threatened by change, whether that change is getting off fossil fuels to fight global warming, a growing majority-minority US population, or a reckoning with our racial past, or a robust social safety net to alleviate poverty. Hence, why we're manipulated to doubt climate science, malign immigrants, or fear DEI. It's all about power, and welfare recipients, minorities, and immigrants have little to no power. So I will leave you with one last thought. To understand any problem in society, always look at who benefits by it and not who suffers from it. Thank you. Right. So one more thing. So before we open up to Q&A, or if we're saving that for later is fine, are there any educators in here? Teachers, librarians? So I can give you postcards, but the publisher and my website has a teacher's guide for my book that you can use in classes. And so it's used in middle schools to colleges here and there. So if you're interested in that or want to learn more, see me afterwards. And if anybody's interested in purchasing a book, I have copies for sale for $25 afterwards. If anyone would like to contact me on social media. And did you want to do Q&A now or wait till later? All right, then I'll do one more thing before we get to Q&A. I often get asked, how do you have the conversations with people who believe all the bullshit? How do you get through to them? So I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but there's a group called Smart Politics, which helps people communicate more effectively with friends and family who believe things that are politically not true. So it was founded by a psychologist who takes a very psychological approach to changing hearts and minds through one-on-one interactions. So they do a lot of online workshops, and they even have an AI chatbot that you can practice having conversations with. So people often ask, and I always try to refer them. So it's a great, it's a great website. They do a podcast, they do all kinds of stuff. But for those that have been infuriated by trying to have these conversations with friends and family, they're a good reference point. So anyway, all right.
Great. That was extremely interesting. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I really learned a lot. Appreciate all that information.
You're welcome.
All right. I see a hand up there. And are you able to speak up, or do you want me to?
I can do it, yes. So should we all get off of Facebook and Instagram? And yeah.
I mean, the short answer probably, but it's, I mean, social media is such a Yeah, I don't know. A lot of people ask that, but it's so hard to get off of social media because that's where you go to now to contact someone, to drop a message, to see where someone lives. Like, it's all there. So one of the most important things is probably to limit your time on there. So I post stuff. Clearly, I'm on social media. I post book stuff and then I post talk stuff, but I rarely just scroll endlessly. And I usually only follow or try to look at posts from credible sources. So if I'm not seeing families, pictures of kids and pets, then I really only want to see stuff from scholars, academics, and real journalists. And so I will constantly close out any ad that's trying to sell me something that I'm not interested in. And then if Fox News or one of the other propaganda news sites were to cross my feed, I would totally block them or train it not to show me that stuff. So that's my own feed. That's not solving the problem for my parents, but.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I forgot, I'm in charge of
Sure.
it. Brian?
Well, thank you. I thought that was an excellent talk. As somebody who worked in the so-called mainstream media for a long time, how do you think we arrest the decline of fair and objective, less emotional news nationally, and then locally? We've seen the closure of over 1,000 local newspapers across the country, which provided historically a lot of fair and unbalanced information about what's happening in local communities that was so critical to making political and civic choices. What do we do about it?
Yeah, well, I think there's a few things that probably need to be done. One is antitrust laws and breaking up media conglomerates. Another is not allowing people from other countries to buy our media. Why would we do that? But also breaking them up. There used to be restrictions. I feel like all of our problems that we have were solved previously in earlier decades or centuries, and media consolidation is one, antitrust enforcement was one. I mean, the fairness doctrine, even besides the balance, they used to have to prove they were a public good. So they couldn't just air hate speech or what have you. They had to have educational content. They had to have real news reporting. So why do we no longer require media outlets with a public license? Why do we not hold them to that standard? And we could do that. So many things we could do, we just don't. And a lot of it goes back to, money and power. And until we have publicly funded campaigns, until we get money out of politics, till we break up tech and all of the other monopolies that are depleting the jobs supply and everything else. So many of our problems are interconnected in that way, and media is no exception. Because the more corporatized media became is when they started, laying off journalists and going for the puff pieces and the, opinion programming, because opinion programming is basically free. So, you just have people arguing and giving an opinion. And so a lot of it's chasing ratings. Unfortunately, Fox News kind of brought down most of the other cable news because all the ratings were going there, so they had to compete. And so I've kind of just stopped watching cable news altogether because I can't take it anymore. And even what I was talking about, the mainstream media outlets have even taken a dive since I first wrote this presentation. The last year or two, we've seen so many tried and true media outlets that have just taken a nosedive. And they're going to become more and more propaganda until something is done about it. But the current trend is not very uplifting at the moment. But yeah.
Well, again, I want to thank you and